Hey there, friends. You're back to Coffee with Matt and Nick. I'm Nick. This is Matt. And last week we talked about visibility in the digital delivery space. And one of the things that came up actually in the article that we published after that call was this idea around if you have too much visibility, you actually can run into a different problem. And I think, Matt, this links nicely in to what we're going to talk about today, which is clarity.
Yes, that's correct. So clarity is one of the four principles of accelerated delivery. So it's one of the foundational sort of mindsets. And what clarity is around how you explain the thing that needs doing to the person that's going to do it in a way that they understand and they feel confident that they're able to be successful in the delivery of that task. It's all about good old fashioned communication, really, at the
Yeah.
end of the
So
day.
visibility is where things are. But what
Yes.
you're saying is clarity is the friction free, hopefully, communication that tells you what you should be doing or who should be
Yes.
doing what happens next, in other words.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something we spoke about last week when we were working on the article. But sometimes the lines blur between the concept of visibility and clarity for these reasons, because you think to yourself, I'm being visible because I'm explaining to somebody what I'm doing. But actually, it's the act of clarifying, the act of explaining is a different thing. Like we can have a
Mm.
wonderful Kanban board that shows where all the different tasks are in the system, but it may not be particularly clear, depending on who's looking at it, what is being done and why.
What's being done next? I mean, in a sense, I
Yeah,
suppose visibility is a snapshot of the state of the system at any one time.
yeah. It's interesting. I mentioned on our first call that I wrote a book in 2018 called Ready for Remote, and we were looking at the principles of remote work, which are still relevant, but everyone thinks they've done remote working now because they installed Microsoft Teams and can have meetings. So anyway, the point is,
Okay.
where I'm going with this is that visibility was one of the principles that we implied there. And it was some of these things that never sat right in my mind. We had trust, visibility, or transparency and clarity. So we had those three principles, which we've
Mm.
now expanded for this. And I never felt like we successfully explained the difference between
Yeah.
visibility and clarity. And we spent a lot of time last week, didn't we, talking about visibility, how
Yeah.
we show the map of where we are, where you are in your progress, and keeping everyone informed of what's going on. And then we were trying to understand the difference between that and clarity, which is why we're talking now, because
Yeah.
um,
So, how, in terms of accelerating digital delivery, which is what you do, how does
yeah,
clarity show up? When is it important?
clarity is important anytime you're handing over a task from one person or one part of the process to the next. And it's a fundamental human communication challenge, really. So when you start a new project, when you're trying to set the context for a project, when you are trying to break the tasks down that you need to work on to deliver it, who is going to do it, who is responsible for the overall outcome, who's responsible for the elements of the work that needs to be done. Do you know what's being asked of you when things go wrong? Are you able to
Mhm.
clearly articulate what's gone wrong, why it's gone wrong, and what steps you or your team are going to take in order to rectify those issues? It's no good just telling somebody that something has gone wrong if you can't tell them what you need to do to resolve it and get things
Yeah.
back on track.
Next, because it might be documented. We talked about the value of checklists in the
Yeah.
accelerator talk. So there's various kinds of this, aren't there? And even, I mean, as a copywriter, Eugene Schwartz said something amazing. He's a legendary copywriter, and he said one of the things I know is a disaster is if someone comes up to me and says, "You've written a beautiful headline," I know I've failed because I don't want the words to get in the way of the meaning, and that's another aspect of
Yeah,
clarity.
I think you're absolutely 100% right. I absolutely agree with that. I think that quite often people confuse information and knowledge, for example. Everyone says a lot. Like you can have a conversation where you're talking with somebody about possible impacts on the projects or possible approaches and all those types of conversations, unless you are then able to say and this is the decision that we made, or these are the impacts that we discussed. These are the actions that we are then going to take based upon this. All they are, like you say, is conversation.
Yeah.
And you need to know when the things you're talking about have a material impact on either the people around you or the project that you're delivering. And it's having the discipline to make sure that you capture those things and that
Yeah.
you are sharing them with everybody so they can understand what's going on. So you're making those things visible. I think that's it's a really interesting point that you raise about the difference between conversations and actions.
So much of this is really basic stuff. I've lost count of how many meetings, when I've sort of been piggybacking on meetings inside client organizations, listening to them talk and agree to do something and not have anyone responsible for that at the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
It's it's really pretty astounding because that, clarity is a very functional thing. And I think that's probably what Schwartz was getting at when he talked about his headline disasters. Let me give you an example. We were out last week, weren't we? We were out in London
Yeah.
together. We went to see Ryan Holiday, brilliant writer on Stoicism. Went to see him
Yeah.
speak. I can confirm, everyone, that Matt has legs. They,
Yeah.
they they exist. So we got home late. In fact, I got off the train before you, and we hadn't had time to eat because I'd missed my train and what have you. But when I got back, my wife and my daughter had a girls' night in, and they'd bought some chocolates and things. And there was a bowl of chocolates sitting on the kitchen counter. I was starving. You were off to McDonald's, weren't you, on the way home? I was starving, and there was this beautiful handwritten note by my daughter who writes like she's typing a font. Her writing's amazing, and it said, "Here you go. These are for you." So
Ah.
yeah, so I ate them all because I hadn't eaten anything all day because we'd been supposed to be going out for a meal. And the next day, Abby was absolutely incensed that I'd eaten all the chocolates. So her writing had great clarity, but it also lacked clarity. So
Yeah.
it was perfectly clear, but it wasn't functional. And I think, when we're talking about this stuff, it's really important to make those. We're not talking about flowery prose or anything that necessarily looks great. It's got to be functional.
Yeah. It's funny you saying that because uh, I have a I have this ongoing conversation with my wife actually about, so sometimes something crops up and I need to write an email to somebody or I need to send a message to somebody on our behalf, like it's a life admin thing.
Yeah,
And I will send a message which is 3 sentences long that says, "This is what I understand of the situation. This is what I need to happen, and these are the actions that need to take." And it's lit. It's I write. It's
functional writing.
concise. It's so functional. And she says to me, "Why don't you think that's rude?" I'm like, "What's rude about it? What I am doing is making it clear what my
Yeah,
responsibilities are and what their responsibilities are, and I'm asking for a specific outcome." Now, I could have made that much more flowery and I had 2 or 3 paragraphs asking them how work was going for them today and stuff like that. But actually, it completely dilutes the purpose of the communication.
yeah,
And I think that's it. And I think that's something we need to bear in mind. Like, we're at work, we're working together as a team in order to deliver a specific outcome for, maybe it's an internal project or it's for a client or
yeah.
whoever. You haven't got a lot of time to flower things up. There's somebody I worked with years ago. They were absolutely wonderful at saying all these great consultancy cliches and statements and stuff like that. And more than once, I had to say to them, "I don't understand what you've said." They had got so ingrained into that mindset where, when you're in an agency and you're trying to tell your customers
Mm.
like why we're deciding on a color of green, and it's all because
Yeah,
it
and
invokes
it
the
it
forest
gets
and
sexed up effectively, doesn't
yeah,
it, to make
yeah,
it
and
sound more important than it is. Yeah, sure.
which is great if you're trying to impress people, but it's terrible when you're trying to get a team to work together to deliver an outcome.
Yeah. But one of the things as a writer, one of the things I've been saying to the clients for years is when I submit something, I remind them that I have a very thick skin. They can't hurt my feelings. And what I want is fast, honest feedback. Because my only interest, of course, is that for it to be good. for
Yeah.
it to be what they want, for it to do the job, for it to be a functional piece of writing that helps build their business. And I think this is true. It's not so true of Americans, I would say, and perhaps other places around the world, but it's certainly true of us in England, where I did suffer a lot from people telling me it was good. And this is a while ago, telling me something was good, but then not really using it
Yeah.
because actually it wasn't quite what they wanted. So this has become a straightforward thing to me now because as well
Mm.
as being clear ourselves, we want our customers and our clients
Do you
and our
know?
team to be really clear with us, to have that clarity with us, because then we can fix the problem.
Yeah. Do you know what? You saying that has reminded me. Years ago, I went to see Malcolm Gladwell give a talk, and he told this in only the way that Malcolm Gladwell can. I think he stood up and he told this magnificent story about air traffic control teams in America. And there was a flight coming in, I think, from India or something like that. But culturally, they're very different. Like Americans, or at least in New
Mm.
York, I think, where this aeroplane was coming into, they're being very direct. And what do you need to? You go here, and it was all very quick fired, very, very direct. And then you had this. I think it was an Indian airplane coming in, and they're much more deferential culturally. And so, when somebody, because they weren't being particularly forthright in what they needed to happen, they were being ignored. Unfortunately for that plane, they were in some form of technical difficulty and they
Really?
shouldn't
Yeah.
have been ignored. And but because of this cultural sensitivities there, they
Yeah,
weren't
there's a
able to
gap.
get through. And
Yeah.
I think that when you're in a system like with in air traffic control, you need strict rules about clarity, about
Yeah.
how to deliver your message functionally so that it will be understood and acted upon, right? You have to have that. That's one of the reasons the aviation industry created very clear checklists and things like that, is because they learn from their mistakes. They learn from these things going wrong. And then they say, okay, if you've got an emergency, you use these words, the channel clears, it's you and this person, you're focused on it, and everyone's working together to get to an outcome. And that time,
Yeah.
those rules didn't exist, I
Right.
think. It reminds me of exactly what you said there, and that is that in the UK, specifically in British teams, people are not used to having conversations where they're being clear and
Forthright.
forthright about what it is they're doing. We tend to say things like, "Oh yeah, that's really good, yes," and then we ignore that, and then we just say, "Yeah, we won't use that." But as you say, I've seen that lots and
Yeah.
lots of different areas.
It is interesting, I think. I mean, it's a muscle that we have to exercise if we've been brought up here, for sure,
Yeah,
is being, I mean, blunt's too strong a word because it's not about being rude. As you said earlier on, it's about just focusing on the things that matter and writing a functional piece of
yeah,
communication. It doesn't, you can still say, "Hi there, how you doing?" But
yeah. It's
boom, boom,
the
boom,
thing
boom,
is,
boom. These are the things that we want to happen.
it's the reasons that meetings have got a bad rap, right? Meetings, to get a group of
Yeah.
people together to focus on a single outcome, or maybe a couple of outcomes on an agenda, to get so that everyone should come away knowing what it is that had been decided, what is actioned upon, and how do we translate that into the things we're going to do.
Mm.
That's the whole purpose of meetings. That's the whole purpose of emails. That's the whole purpose of, in a work context.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
these things are for. The reason that these things have got such bad rap nowadays is because we don't have agendas. We don't focus on the purpose of that and making sure the right people are in the room to make the decisions they need to make. I've worked with clients in the past. They do review sessions with their development teams. There's like 40
Yeah.
people on the call.
Wow.
I
I don't know how that can be
cannot
useful, 40
understand
people.
how 40 people can get to any kind of outcome, and for everyone to know exactly what it is they need to do and how they're all working together to deliver something. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. But these
Yeah.
poor communication strategies, like having a meeting where actions are not taken and we're not followed up and that sort of stuff, creates poor communication channels, which clouds the clarity, and then that decelerates your
Yeah.
delivery process, because like people wait until the next meeting a week later or whenever it is to say, oh, I didn't do my action because I didn't know that it was important. I didn't know that it needed to be done by X or Y. And
Yeah.
everyone's busy. No
I
one's
didn't I
chasing
didn't
anything
know
up.
I was supposed to do it.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah. All right. So
that's
we've talked about what clarity is, and I want to come on to shortly how you make sure it's delivered. But I wonder what it looks like in the digital development process when you don't have it. How do things go wrong? Have you got an example of
yeah.
things going wrong?
Oh, absolutely. The principles have been born out of learning and reflecting on basically every mistake that I've made ever with any
Born of
team that
pain.
I've had. We, I know, I think I mentioned in the last podcast that all my development teams I've been running have been remote for the last 10, 15 years or so. And you have to, so we over indexed on visibility essentially. So we created
Mhm.
Kanban walls that made sure that everyone knew that they were doing. And then we got to a point in our process once where we needed to go live with some work. The people that had been working on the deployment process at that time and weren't in the office for some reason. I let them have holiday or some foolish thing, and so it was my responsibility then to pick up to make sure we were ready to go live with the product. And I looked at this board and it was amazing. The tasks that everyone was needing to do were there. Who was
Mhm.
responsible for delivering them? That was all there. I knew exactly the state they were on. I knew they were all in UAT. But the
Ah,
problem is, I didn't know that any of them were in ready for deployment or UAT signed off. So
right.
I looked at this, I looked at this board and it was like 10 o'clock on a Friday. We're going live on the weekend because we're working with people in retail and we need to go
Hmm.
when the shops are shut.
Yeah.
And from what I could tell, we had to test basically every piece of functionality that we'd built ever. And so I'm thinking, how the hell are we going to do that in a day and deal with any bugs that might come out of this? Because this is ridiculous.
So I'm clear then all of these cards were in the process of being tested, quality assurance, but
Well,
they were supposed to
according
be signed off.
according to the board that I
Yeah.
was looking at, they were all in available to be tested, but
Right.
none of them had been tested and
Got it.
signed off. That's
Got
what
it.
I could tell from the board. There was 95 tickets.
No.
And it turns out, so this was, you obviously panic. And I'm thinking to
Yeah,
myself,
yeah.
we can't go live with this. This is ridiculous.
Mm.
And so we had all the visibility in the world. I knew exactly where these cards were I know well where these features were in our outcome, but what I didn't have any clarity on is were these things tested or not. Actually, I
Mm.
knew that the client had signed things off, so that was a good thing. I knew that
Okay.
things had been signed off, but I didn't know what had been signed off because those cards had not been moved to the correct signed off column. So therefore I didn't know what are the of the 95, what were the X number that actually needed testing. Well, it turned out there were only two of them in the end.
Okay.
So 2 out of 95 hadn't been tested, but I had no clarity on
Yeah.
the situation at all.
So that's a really good example, a really good
Yeah,
distinction between these two things, isn't it? Yeah.
absolutely. And this is the challenge, right? You can have
Mhm.
all the you can have all the visibility into your systems, but if you can't trust that it's all up to date and you haven't been given the information that you need to know what the next steps are, i.e. can we go live, then you're in for a world of hurt, which is
So we're saying that your understanding was that some of these cards had been signed off by the client, but it seemed like they were in the wrong place, or potentially they were in the wrong place, and you say there were only two of them actually should have been in that
yes.
particular row.
Yeah, yeah.
So somewhere there was a clarity problem or a handover problem,
Yes.
presumably.
And that's the thing, right, isn't it? Because we said clarity is about the way we communicate or how we communicate.
Yeah.
So when the people who were dealing with this finished up before they went on holiday, now they were busy, right? They're not neglectful people.
No.
They were busy getting ready for a deployment and making sure that everything had been signed off by the client and that we were in a good space to be able to go live.
Yeah.
But what they missed was the one piece of communication that I needed, and that is only these two cards need to be put onto our UAT environment and be tested. If I'd
Yeah.
known that, I wouldn't have worried about the other 95 cards that were in that column. And it was just all I needed was that. And that's where the clarity, like my job on that day was to answer the question, are we ready to go live with this work? Do we have
Yeah.
everything we need on production? So I looked at our environment with that one question in my mind, and the answer I got back was, how can we be ready? Because there are 95 things I need to test in 7 hours, and I need to bug fix and redeploy anything else. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah, it was a fun, it was a fun day. But it
taking a
turned out,
step back from it, I mean, it's one of those things that, I mean, it can sound like we're blaming people. We're absolutely not, because as you said, these guys were busy. They've been working very hard. But we take a step back and look at the processes, the documentation, the standard operating procedures, and identify where that gap was and fill it. Make sure that they're,
yeah,
in the future, particular issue doesn't crop up again.
well, it's like we said about the way that the aviation industry works with checklists and stuff. Every time there is an accident, every time there is, and I'm using accident for us in the development
Yeah,
world, I'm
yeah,
using
yeah,
accident in very loosely. Every time something goes wrong, that's the time you need to reflect and you need to understand what in your process has meant that fell through the gap,
yeah,
right? And then once you know that, you can then stop it from happening again. And therefore, you don't make that
yeah,
mistake again, and you are further down the road to delivery. You're able to deliver or accelerate your delivery quicker because
yeah,
you are filling the gaps. And that's,
yeah,
no process that you use for anything is finished ever.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was saying to you earlier that I'm one of these terrible people that I'm never satisfied. Like every time I do something, I feel sorry for my team sometimes because they show me the work they've done. And I'm like, yeah, that's brilliant. And then I'm like, and now on to the next thing. Have you thought about this? Have you done that? And it's just because I've accepted that's, great. So like when we look at our principles, trust, clarity, visibility, and consistency, these are all things that have grown out of doing this for the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah,
When we did the ready for remote principles, there was only three of them
yeah,
because you learn what's more important, like you understand where your gaps are.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that's anyway,
Okay,
that's
that's good.
what I
So
think
I
about
think we may have covered some of this, but let's talk about how you, as a company, how you ensure that there is clarity. How do you go about filling those gaps?
we I'm chuckling to myself slightly because it's I think it's just simple. What we do
Good.
is
Yeah,
like I think to myself, where are the risk points in our work? Where are the risks where miscommunication can happen?
yeah,
And what do we need to do to resolve those issues? So on our Kanban board, we have columns for design to dev handover, and then we have columns for uh, dev to design review, because we know that at the point that a designer's done their work and they want to hand it over to the developer to do it, we know that's where we need specific time together in order to talk
right.
about the designs, talk about what the functionality that's required, and answer any questions. So we make sure that there is time for those meetings to happen, very
Yeah.
focused meetings. Do you
Hmm.
understand the intent of this design work that I'm handing over to you so that you can implement it technically? We also ensure that happens the other way around. So when a developer has finished their work, they automatically schedule the time in with the design team just to make sure that work is done the way that was expected. If they're
Okay.
obviously temperature check as we go along, it's not
You're kind of
completely.
backstopping it there, really.
Yeah. When we create tasks for the board, we ensure that we have a template for the work. What is it that we're asking you to do? Who is it for? Putting the
Hmm.
context in. the acceptance criteria and things like that around the task itself. That belongs in the cards.
Yeah.
When there are other things like, for example, when a developer has finished a piece of work, we always make sure that it's validated by another member of the development team. Therefore, when a piece of work is done, we need to make sure that the cards that were associated with that piece of work are obvious to whoever is going to do the review, so they can
Yeah.
check to see that everything that should have been done has been done. These are all, there's a mix of conversations, meetings, and assets, cards, and things that go through our Kanban board that support this type of stuff.
Yeah.
So they're on a day-to-day basis, I think they're the key areas of handover that requires the clarity that you need to deliver the work that you need to do. I think the exceptions are things like when something has gone wrong, or if you're unsure as to what it is that you need to do, then how do you describe the problem in a way that the person that is helping you understands where to go next?
Yeah.
And that's just like good husbandry to make sure that you're making the best use of the other people's times that you're working with.
Makes sense. I think the other thing I'd add, which the best companies I've worked with, they also create this culture where not only does everyone feel like they can ask if they don't understand, you're not gonna look stupid. You're not gonna
Mm.
you're not gonna get pilloried. Not only have they got that, it's okay to ask, but it's also your responsibility to ask if you don't understand.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that responsibility piece is a big thing, right? Your responsibility is not just to do the work, but it's also to make sure that you are communicating with the people that are the recipients, or your work as a side effect to it,
Yeah.
but for them to understand what it is and the context that it sits in. It's an interesting area of discussion, really, because
Yeah.
ownership and responsibility, and then how that factors into the broader delivery process.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big deal in teams, isn't it? You being responsible for your work, but equally responsible for the delivery of the whole project and, yeah, behind the delivery of the whole project. I think these kind of cultural things, and it's partly why defining principles is so important, because they speak to the culture of any business, or in some cases the lack of culture. And what we want are people who, yeah, can follow instructions, yes, can be clear, yes, consistent, all that kind of thing, but also have the autonomy and the sense that they should fix things if there's a problem, that they are part of a solution. They're not just one little cog and the whole thing's over. They're part of this bigger thing, and everyone has
Yeah,
that responsibility.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I think what you said there is really important, because we are all responsible for the successful system that we are working in order to deliver our outcomes, but also to so that the environment that we're working in is nice, so that we're
Yeah,
learning, so that we're able to drive our own personal goals forward as well. I talk about these principles a lot in terms of functional messaging of the thing that you need to do and the delivery and the outcome and stuff like that. But actually, if you can get all that stuff working well, it creates opportunities for you to try new things, to have a life outside of the heads down doing work, because
yeah,
actually that is running, or should be running, really smoothly, that
yeah,
you're able to finish things quickly and that
yeah,
you're able to move on. I think this is all about humanizing the workplace. We talk
yeah,
about getting
yeah.
things done quick, but actually the benefit of doing things quickly and doing things well is that you should have time to do other things that you can't do because, like, you're
Well, you can't do
clarifying.
if there's a panic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. That's important to remind ourselves that at the end of the day, we are people trying to get things done, and we need to be kind to each other in terms of like helping each other out as much as we can to get those things done, which is why in my opinion, the principles are really important,
yeah,
and because they set a framework, they set boundaries.
yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. That was
Cool.
great. I look forward to the article on clarity, and
Excellent.
I'll see you next time for the next part of our chat.
Yes. Yeah. Look forward to that.